Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I want to share with you 3 rules for better practice. Better musical practice, of course, better guitar practice, but really any kind of learning and any kind of practice you might want to endeavor in. As some of you know, I'm a psychologist, even though not a practicing one, but I did complete my studies in the early 2000s. And one of the key things of psychology is to optimize the potential of your mind. And we all know that playing an instrument, the mind is where it all happens. You hear the notes you want to play, you hear the sound you want to produce, you control your fingers or your feet and hands, whatever extremities are involved in your instrument of choice. And we all know that mindless practice will bear very little fruit. As a matter of fact, as you start progressing, mindless practice might actually make you worse. Rule number 1, which I consistently broke for many years because I simply didn't know any better, is quality over quantity. You might have all heard about the 10,000 hours one must practice to become a professional or a master at something. Well, it really all depends on what you're doing with those 10,000 hours. I spent tens of thousands of hours playing the guitar through the years, but I probably wasted 15 or 20% of those hours doing meaningless and actually maybe even harmful stuff. I've had students come in where as soon as I watch them play, I know they've wasted 80% of their time. So it's kind of tragic, and it's really hard to then talk somebody into changing their ways to finally maximize their time. And as you grow up, you have less and less time too, so it becomes even more important. So my first advice with this would be to break things down into manageable fragments and actually measurable fragments. For example, I would just sit down and go, okay, now I'm going to play 10 hours of scales. And that's a noble cause, but what are you trying to achieve? Instead of doing that, maybe I would say, okay, I'm going to learn all the modes. There are 7 modes. I'm going to give one mode to each day of the week, and then depending on how much time I have, I would say, okay, I'll learn one position each, maybe all of them if I have enough time. And then a week from now, I can sit down, look back and go, what did I do well? What went wrong? Where did I waste my time? Where did I achieve? And then you start building a method over those results. If your results are vague or foggy, it's really hard to build anything upon them, and then you'll enter this cycle of just wasting time. And yes, there will be some results, but those will only work in the beginning because the level of your practice must exceed the level of your playing. Otherwise, you won't go anywhere. So as soon as you get a bit better and your practice doesn't get better, that's when you get stuck. Rule number 2 is to always operate just outside of your current comfort zone. There's a great book out there called Make It Stick: The Science of Successful Learning. I'll link it below if you want to check it out. And in it, you'll find this wonderful term, desirable difficulties, which is such a great way of putting it. Desirable difficulties. It really gives you an idea of what it is we're talking about. And a lot of people tend to associate it with speed, actually. So I can play something at this speed, well, I'm going to push myself here, then a few BPMs more, and then more, and then more. And certainly the technical part is part of it. So speed, timing, your bends and legatos, all that, of course. But there's also a mental aspect to it. Maybe you understand chords, but you really have no idea about alter chords, and you really should because you're in a jazz band. So you really have to know it, but it's such a fog of knowledge that you're missing. Well, start slow, create a path, and maybe today learn about dominant chords. It will be a bit of a stretch for you, it will be a bit hard, but you can manage it. Then tomorrow, you get into the alter chords and you realize you have no idea what ninths and fifths and all this stuff is. Well, you go back, next step will be to learn your intervals. And that might take a few days. When you're there, you can start applying some of these intervals to your dominant chords, and so on and so forth. Again, quality over quantity, and you'll eventually get there. So another way of putting it would be study what you don't know, play what you can play. Don't revel in your accomplishments, but instead always look for the next challenge. And finally, rule number 3 is to get feedback. You've built this bubble of concentration and motivation. It's great for learning, but it's very hard to get perspective on what it is you're doing and what you're achieving as compared to what you're trying to achieve. And I've missed that for a long, long time. I'm self-taught. I went crazy with the guitar since the age of 14 until today, and it's really hard sometimes to break away from your own mind, and I've got some bad surprises once in a while, you know, get on stage and think that I was completely ready and realize that I knew nothing, starting giving lessons thinking that I knew all this stuff and then not being able to put it into words and to make it relatable to other people. It's very important that you eventually take what you learned and put it out there into the real world, and then you can step back and assess and make corrections. So how do you go about doing that? Well, the first way would be to have a teacher, a good teacher, not just any teacher, but he or she will be able to point out many things that might escape you in your constant concentration, and also because they're looking at things from a different level than you are at. It's much easier for them to point things out. Another great way of getting feedback is putting yourself out there and perform your music. If you're in a band, your bandmates will let you know if you're not improving. When you perform your music, you'll be very, very aware of the things that are working and those that are not. And so it's a constant feedback loop you get. Even if it's just a rehearsal or a small gig, it doesn't matter. You're out there playing your music and you will know if your practice is bearing fruits. Another great way is to record yourself. Play something at the beginning of the week, practice, record it at the end of the week again, and simply compare. If your practice has been fruitful, you should have a clear winner at the end of the week. If not, you might have to go back and reassess. One final word of warning: using these rules in your practice is not always going to be easy. Sometimes there are a lot of work. Sometimes you'll actually feel that you're regressing in your playing, but don't be discouraged. Learning is a complicated, complex process, and you just have to give it time. So put in your best work and the results will come. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.